Nearly 2 years after the release of Pokemon Colosseum, Genius Sonority brought us another game set in the Ori region with Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness. Like Colosseum, it's a standalone Pokemon RPG meant as a companion game for the Generation 3 titles that provides a unique spin on the main series formula, which remains a selling point over 15 years later. As a sequel, it's enriched by playing Colosseum, but you can absolutely start here instead if you'd prefer. Like last time, we'll be primarily discussing elements such as world design, Pokemon variety, and boss design. Let's get started. Unlike the bombastic, character-establishing introduction of Colosseum, this game's introduction highlights Shadow Lugia, the Pokemon who adorns the game's box art, marketing material, and the thumbnail of this very video. It's easily the most recognizable part of the game, but does it live up to the hype? We'll find out later on, but here, Shadow Lugia and a group of Cypher helicopters pluck an entire cargo ship out of the ocean and take off, stranding the crew at sea. While not as instantly memorable as the first game, this opening cutscene contrasts with the first few hours of the game and establishes this new Cypher as a threat right off the bat. Following this, we're thrown into a tutorial battle, Salamence vs Metagross. If you're already aware of these Pokemon, it's an easy win for you. But even if you aren't, it doesn't really matter. That was a simulation battle conducted by this game's protagonist, Michael. Michael better fits into the mold of other Pokemon protagonists. He's a beginning trainer with an aptitude for battle, living with his mother, his sister Jovi, and Professor Crane at the Pokemon HQ lab established during the 5-year gap between games to prepare for any future Shadow Pokemon incidents. Although the intro cutscene establishes that sinister forces are still at work in Ori, XD's overall tone is lighter and softer than Colosseum's, and its introductory sequence much more newcomer-friendly. The background music helps to establish this upbeat mood as well, and this even extends to the trainer battle theme. The HQ lab sets the stage for the start of the adventure nicely, in a lush, wooded setting with plenty of optional tutorial content for new players, from explanations of series mechanics, an improved strategy memo that no longer requires manual updates, to full simulation battles that teach basic Pokemon concepts. The best part is that you start with Eevee, a starter choice so good I'm surprised it never happens again in a game with main series mechanics. Anyone who's used an Eevee before will immediately understand why. You're given the opportunity to evolve it into any of the 5 then current evolutions very early on, and any choice you make could easily accompany you through the rest of the adventure. Having such early access to a great fire, water, electric, psychic, or dark type is fantastic, and sets you up to build a team that aligns with your playstyle, unlike Colosseum. Starting the adventure proper, our first task is to find Jovi at Dr. Kaminko's manor, a stereotypical mad scientist's abode in the middle of a creepy forest, home to the doctor and his assistant Chobin. These two are minor characters who are mostly comic relief, but we'll see them again occasionally. Of note is the monitor inside where Chobin describes the doctor's terrible inventions. This has no bearing on the plot, but is a shining example of this game's sense of humor, and a couple of these got a laugh out of me, so that's got to count for something, right? Jovi, on the other hand, totally fails to land as comic relief. In nearly every scene she's in, she's a condescending little jerk, and she always refers to herself in the third person. It's a trait most Western players tend to find annoying, and combined with the fact that I have little to no experience with younger family members, and you get a character that seems tailor-made to annoy me. At least she isn't forced on you too often or for too long. Back at the lab, Professor Crane summons us to be the first to test the fruits of his research. A new snag machine and aura reader, removing the need for a constant companion character like Rui, and ensuring that unlike the original model, this snag machine can only be used on Shadow Pokemon. It's an element I glossed over when I looked at Colosseum, but these two games are the only ones in the series where not only can you steal Pokemon from other trainers, you're required to do so. It's an important flavor element that's a huge appeal for many fans, but I think it slipped my mind last time because it was so mechanically inconsequential, combined with me being used to the idea after replaying these games many times over the years. Before we can try out a simulation though, an opportunity to try a field test strikes as Cypher ambushes Professor Crane and we're thrown into the capture tutorial. snagging the first Shadow Pokemon, Teddiursa. As essentially your second starter, Teddiursa is also a great pick. It's rare for Teddiursa to be available before post-game, so the opportunity to use it here still feels special. On top of that, if you continue to raise it, Ursaring has no trouble keeping up during the late game. And even if you opt not to use it, it's guaranteed to have pickup, giving you free items every now and then. Even though we end up stealing back Teddiursa, Naps and crew manage to spear the professor away, leaving the situation feeling hopeless until it's decided the Purify Chamber project must be completed in his absence. We're asked to go to Gaetianport and pick up a part for the machine, and unfortunately have to let Jovi tag along. As the name suggests, Gaetianport is a seaside town that manages to feel right at home in Ore while maintaining the more upbeat, positive mood of the game. Much of the town looks modern and clean, and the laid-back tune complements the setting perfectly. Eager to show you to the parts shop, Jovi runs right into Zook, a big tough guy openly parading around his Shadow Zangoose. Before we're given the chance to steal it, a little old man named Mr. Varich and his bodyguards butt in to show him some manners. It's obvious that we'll cross paths with these four again. After a quick visit to the parts shop, we get the machine part and an item that will evolve Eevee, one of the evolution stones, or more curiously, a sun or moon shard. It's interesting to see the lengths Game Freak is, or at least was, willing to go to avoid retconning evolution methods, since these shards aren't used directly on Eevee, but rather stay in the bag and evolve it when it reaches maximum friendship. Once we deliver the part, we're told to visit Agat Village to see about purifying Teddiursa. It's basically unchanged from Colosseum, as we'll find to be the case with many returning areas, but there's still a few goodies to collect in similar places. The main plotline puts us through a small gauntlet of friendly battles meant to help purify Teddiursa, so this seems like a good time to explain what's new with Shadow Pokemon. Unlike Colosseum, there's both a narrative reason and many gameplay reasons why Shadow Pokemon could be desirable, and many of the rougher edges of the system have been worked out in XD. To start, there's more than one Shadow move, and none of them inflict recoil, making catching them much less of a chore. Hyper Mode is replaced with Reverse Mode. There's no benefits to it, and it still inflicts recoil, but it's an easy way to reduce the heart gauge, and its activation no longer eats a turn. Every Shadow move is super effective against regular Pokemon, and not very effective against other Shadow Pokemon. And it might surprise you to learn that this is the game that first introduced the physical special split, as Shadow moves are the only ones that can be either physical or special. Although unfortunately there's no indication of what category a move fits into in-game. Shadow Pokemon also have a 50% increase in speed compared to regular Pokemon. Add all this up and it makes sense why Cypher would want to create them and why they're dangerous. Fighting against them is a bit more interesting too. Enemy Shadow Pokemon get a small stat boost, and all of them start off with at least 2 Shadow moves, increasing as you progress. Trainers tend to send out Shadow Pokemon first instead of saving them for last, succeeding in making snagging more difficult where Colosseum failed. And you can only keep a snagged Shadow Pokemon if you win the battle. It's a lot of small changes, but they add up to a system that makes it more interesting to fight with and against Shadow Pokemon, and occasionally makes waiting to purify one a reasonable option. After this gauntlet, we're asked to head to Mount Battle, where the bodyguard in red from earlier muses to us about strength and doing the right thing. Surely nothing important there, right? This visit to Mount Battle treads no new ground, and although it's thankfully shorter than the one in Colosseum, it's a very slow start to the game if you're familiar with Pokemon, and especially if you played Colosseum prior. In another familiar moment, Vander points us to the Shadow Pokemon Lab, the first major dungeon. Around this point, many optional things pop up in places we've previously visited, most notably 2 optional Shadow Pokemon encounters in Gaetianport. When we first reach the Shadow Pokemon Lab, we're treated to the Hexagon Brothers, another comic relief group that adds a bit of levity through their incredible stupidity many times when you revisit the area. Only one of them must be fought to gain entry to the lab, but each of them has a Shadow Pokemon of a different type in tow, and this seems like a good point to talk about Pokemon variety. On screen now is a list scrolling through every Shadow Pokemon in the game, and most of the list up until around the very end is a viable addition to your team. Compared to Pokemon Colosseum's 47 unique Pokemon available before the post-game, XD more than doubles that with around 100 unique Pokemon available before post-game. It's a smaller set of available Pokemon than other main series entries, especially modern ones, but it's much closer to the bar set around the time. And various other aspects of the game flesh it out into a great selection with a ton of potential. Availability is the first major success of this roster. With the Hexagon Brothers, we have access to most of the types in the game already, with most of the ones we're missing not far away. And they're almost all very solid Pokemon choices. The second boon is that TMs are much more available than they were last time, with favorites like Flamethrower, Earthquake, and Ice Beam being easily accessible as the game progresses. The third lies in a new benefit of purification. On top of regaining missed experience and becoming able to level up again, Pokemon learn at least one move they normally couldn't. In many cases, these moves remain exclusive to Pokemon XD even today. Some are better than others. Refresh doesn't tend to be worthwhile, but moves like Charm, Sing, Helping Hand, and Heal Bell are all fantastic, especially in a doubles-focused environment. Despite unfortunately not having a universal physical special split or the more refined doubles mechanics of later generations, XD is still the best showcase of the format in-game even years later. Team building options expand dramatically when you take doubles into account, and strategies you would never see in any other main Pokemon journey shine bright here. On top of the doubles focused moves many Pokemon gain from purification, abilities that might otherwise be situational can be taken full advantage of. Use Flareon and Houndour for a double Flash Fire strategy. Keep Vaporeon or Jolteon healthy with moves of their type. Use Earthquake with a flying or levitating Pokemon out. And that's just to name a few. Because of how valuable some moves are, you can make a case for even some of the more niche Pokemon on your team. Heal Bell Mightyena? Sure, why not? About the only area where Colosseum selection's better is in terms of making a weather team, as you're not given those options until about the middle of the game. And there is some overlap in available Pokemon between the two, but XD offers far more flexibility than Colosseum ever did. The Shadow Pokemon Lab this time around is almost unchanged from the last game, but this time you explore it in reverse, with some formerly mandatory areas becoming optional. Lovrina is introduced partway through, trying to convince Crane to help tune the ultimate Shadow Pokemon to no avail. And as you'd expect, she's the area boss standing in your way when you finally bust the professor out. On my first playthrough as a kid, I struggled against her, and in hindsight I have no idea why. Lovrina's team, especially compared to Mirror B in the first game, is pathetic. You already have so many more options at your disposal, including better Shadow Pokemon, and the Pokemon she uses are already very weak. A Luvdisc, a Beautifly, a Roselia, and a Shadow Delcatty. When Roselia is the star member of your team, you know your team has significant problems. Even the Shadow Boost doesn't help Delcatty much. It's prone to using Shadow Wave, working off its pitiful special attack stat, and although Shadow Rush may hurt a normal Pokemon, your team is likely mostly comprised of Shadow Pokemon at this point, making what's supposed to be her ace even less effective. Most players will breeze through this battle, grab the data ROM she drops, and get Professor Crane back home. Here we get word that the Purify Chamber has finally been completed. This is another huge leap forward from Colosseum. Shadow Pokemon are easier to purify in general, but the Purify Chamber makes it much easier to passively purify large amounts of Shadow Pokemon throughout your adventure. Up to 9 Pokemon can be purified at once, and the speed at which their heart gauge is reduced depends on the regular Pokemon placed around the Shadow Pokemon. This uses a simplified type matchup system where type neutrality isn't considered and normal types are considered super effective against themselves. A full chain of 4 type matchups results in the fastest tempo, increasing the gauge reduction as you walk to the maximum. It's difficult to get started, but as you get more Pokemon, purification becomes much faster. The only drawback is that although you can adjust Pokemon in the chamber at any PC, you can only purify a Pokemon in the chamber by returning to the lab. Unfortunately, there isn't a reward for purifying every Shadow Pokemon other than the satisfaction of doing so, but I guess that's good enough on its own. Efforts to recover Cypher's data from the ROM aren't going well here, so we're sent to see some familiar faces in Pyrite Town, where two more familiar faces show up, hinting at a certain Disco Fiend's return later on. In the 5 years since Coliseum, the Pyrite building has been renovated into ONBS, a news agency helmed by the members of the Kids Grid. You're free to explore most of the building, and there's a small side quest here about returning a lost child to her mother that nets you a Soothe Bell. It's not much, but the goings-on in the studio makes it feel more lived in and authentic. We hand the ROM over to Net, and while we're waiting on that, we're told to go check out what Duking has been up to. His fascination has shifted to Pokespots, a strange middle ground between having wild encounters and not having any. Leave up to 10 snacks in one and continue your journey elsewhere, and eventually you'll be notified that a wild Pokemon has appeared. Catching one from here is business as usual, but if you wait too long between getting the alert and heading to the spot, the Pokemon will have eaten all the bait. In a world-building sense, it works. Having to stake out the rare wild Pokemon repopulating Ore is a neat idea. But since you're forced to drop everything to check on the spot, and you're not told which one of the 3 spots is going off without manually checking if you bait more than one, it can get frustrating in practice. There's only 9 different Pokemon to be found like this too, 12 if you include the ones Duking will trade you for rare encounters. More variety is certainly nice, but the mechanic being annoying to work with means you'll probably want to skip this unless you really want one of the Pokemon listed. Well, technically there's 13 Pokemon. In a move we haven't seen since, XD includes cameos of Gen 4 Pokemon over a year before release. Munchlax will occasionally show up to eat all the bait you put down, and if you catch it in the act, you'll get a full replacement for the trouble. The marketing cycle between Gens 3 and 4 was pretty wild in retrospect. There were a lot of cameos like this in the Gen 3 side games, and it's something that hasn't really been repeated since. Moving along, after visiting the other Pokespot Duking mentions, he'll point you to a third, more secluded spot. And visiting there, we find it's a temporary hideout for the Disco King himself, Mirror B. He seems to have fallen on hard times and has struck out on his own with his ever-loyal goons. He's a shadow of the boss he once was. He's only packing Lombre and a Shadow Voltorb and shouldn't give you much trouble. His theme, however, is top-notch, a fitting disco beat that's one of my favorite tracks in the whole series. Once his posse flees, we obtain the Mirror Radar. Pokemon you fail to snag are sent to Mirror B instead, and when he has at least one in his possession, the radar may go off to inform you he's at a Coliseum somewhere in Ore. It's more convenient to have all the missed Shadow Pokemon in one place, but since he only carries one at a time, you're still incentivized to snag them on your first try if possible. Returning to ONBS, Cypher has taken over, holding everyone they can hostage to buy time to retrieve the data ROM. There are a few mandatory battles here, but a lot of optional fights to save hostages as well. You aren't rewarded for saving any of them beyond the experience and money you gained from the fight, which seems like a missed opportunity. It would have felt much more rewarding if you got anything for your efforts, even just a small healing item. None of the mandatory battles will pose much challenge, and the mini-boss at the top is somewhat of a threat. Whether you win or lose, it's all for naught. Cypher successfully scrubbed the servers clean and flees with the ROM in hand. At least we got some intel from it. Cypher's planning a major attack on Fennec City, so that's our next destination. The music that plays here immediately suggests that something isn't quite right. Most of the buildings are empty, and the residents are acting strangely. A trip to the mayor's house reveals that he discovered the plot to replace the entire town with Cypher plants, getting kidnapped before he could finish his letter. Pre-Gym is the logical next destination, and out of it marches the Justy Gang! It's another nice moment of levity amidst the darker subject at hand. These fights are all optional. A lot of encounters in XD are compared to Colosseum, and it's much appreciated after Colosseum's many relentless gauntlets. We are ultimately directed to Fenix Stadium to free the townsfolk from Pre-Gym's basement, and here we encounter the second major boss, Snaddle, trying to get rid of video evidence of Cypher's wrongdoing. His team has no major theme, just a lantern, Quagsire, Castform, and Metang, with Lunatone as his shadow Pokemon. It's by far the most threatening of the bunch because of Shadow Sky, creating unique shadow weather that works like sandstorm or hail against regular Pokemon and boosts the power of shadow moves. You're likely to outpace him in levels at this point though, and with his defeat caught on film, he flees the scene, allowing us to get things back to normal. We're told that Cypher likely acted to quash rumors about something going on in the desert to the north, but the terrain is impassable. The next part of the game sort of gives you the runaround. Back to ONBS, then Gadeonport, then Kaminko's Manor, then back to Gadeonport before we can finally make progress, but oddly I don't really mind it this time. It feels much brisker than it sounds since there's a few story beats between it all. The request to find Bonsly, the news story about your victory against Snaddle, another encounter with Mr. Varich, and the ultimate battle with Chobin against Robo Groudon. It's technically a boss fight and happens immediately after another mistaken burglary case. The adorable little mech contributes little to his skill in battle, however. He runs a Sun team ill-equipped to take advantage of it, consisting of Sunflora, Gyarados, Hoppip, and Tropius. His grass types get faster, but his team is extremely weak to fire, and a Gyarados with only Bite and Thrash isn't likely to contribute much. With Chobin likely easily defeated, Kaminko halts his Robo-Pokemon plan entirely, hinting at Robo-Kyogre, and we're finally able to upgrade the scooter and proceed to find the SS Libra wrecked in the middle of the desert. We're introduced to the next Cypher admin, Gorgon, and his idiot peons who directly explain the SS Libra plan. Every Pokemon on the ship has been taken and turned into a shadow Pokemon. After a quick skirmish, a man who's made the ship home invites us in to take a rest and requests that we investigate a noise further into the ship. Exploring the ship is much like a typical Pokemon dungeon, complete with block puzzles similar to strength puzzles in the main series, but ones that take advantage of the 3D plane to create simple but rewarding puzzles for some powerful items. The missing Bonsly is the culprit, but it's scared away before we can grab it. The positive press we've been getting isn't all good as it turns out. Team Snag'em ambushes us when we leave the ship, and amazingly they decide battling you is a bad idea and opt to put you to sleep instead, stealing the snag machine and fleeing. The shipman tells us they're headed off to the north, where Zook is standing guard in front of a large facility. He easily takes down the Snag'em grunts and has his sights set on revenge against you. It's not an especially tough encounter, but you still have the Aura Reader, reassuring you that you can't possibly miss a shadow Pokemon while reminding you of your newfound powerlessness. We're eventually pointed towards the outskirts stand to meet a defecting Cypher scientist getting stopped again by Mirror B. His team is much the same as before, but with a Shadow Nosepass you can't capture. It's a good motivator to get back the snag machine and ensures you have to use the Mirror Radar at least once even if you catch every other shadow Pokemon without fail. The scientist describes the building we saw as Cypher Key Lair, a plant for creating shadow Pokemon. He gives us a Shadow Togepi he spirited away and asks us to purify it. If we return it to him, we get a special allocated with the 3 elemental punches. Since this is Gen 3, they're all special moves, making this a great trade if you're interested in using it. The 5-year time gap has not been kind to Team Snag'em. With the hideout still in shambles and few named members returning from the last game, Wes's actions have left a lasting impact. It's quick to get through here, with many encounters being optional, leading up to a fight against Gonzap. Like Colosseum, his strategy is having no concrete strategy, just powerful Pokemon and powerful moves. Outmuscle him and we get the snag machine back, as well as a temporary alliance with the group to storm Cypher Key Lair. As with all the areas new to XD, Cypher Key Lair is thankfully more than just a straight line. There are optional areas to explore with some light puzzle solving necessary to get to different parts of the dungeon. This is also the point where enemy trainers will start sending out multiple shadow Pokemon at once, potentially complicating things even more if you're out to snag them all. It does tend to drag a bit though, especially because of how agonizingly slow box pushing is. At the top, we fry the production line and face Gorgon, the first boss to use multiple shadow Pokemon. He uses the same Earthquake strategy as Dakeem in Colosseum. The difference being that you have many more options at your disposal to deal with this strategy at a much later point in your adventure. His Shadow Hypno is incapable of hurting you, instead softening you up for its allies to finish the job. And if Shadow Primeape is still around, it can easily do so with powerful shadow moves to take advantage of it. After losing, Gorgon threatens to blow up the whole facility with you in it, but is stopped by Mr. Verich. Or rather, Greevil, the true boss of Cypher. He taunts us, challenging us to face him at Citydark Isle, if we can find a way to get through the storm surrounding the island. The Robo-Kyogre from before turns out to be the key to getting there. Citydark Isle is the game's final dungeon, and it's a contender for the longest dungeon in the series. It's viable to pick up your last team member or two here. It's that long, with nearly half of all Shadow Pokemon being held by trainers in this dungeon. There's dead ends, traps, puzzles, and secrets hidden throughout, with the puzzles changing area by area as you go. Nothing here is exactly complex, but it breaks up the pace between fights incredibly well, with trainers using Shadow Pokemon throughout to keep you on your toes. The worst part of the dungeon is that while there are checkpoints throughout, there's no easy way to go back to town if you end up needing supplies, forcing you to backtrack through the whole dungeon. Also breaking up the pace is a boss rush. Between segments of the dungeon, you'll be challenged to rematches by Cypher's admin, starting with Lavrina. This time, her strategy mirrors Venus from Colosseum, relying partly on luck, partly on type coverage, with Shadow Farfetch'd and Altaria in the back. It's a simple fight if you're not trying to snag them, but things can get dicey if you don't have a way to cushion their blows. Snettle has no particular theme beyond mild weather manipulation and generally strong Pokemon choices. Metang, Quagsire, Scizor, Shadow Solrock, and Shadow Stormy. Oh, and cast form, I guess. Solrock and Starmie together can be frightening to face. If Solrock activates Shadow Sky, Starmie becomes terrifyingly strong and can tear apart teams of regular Pokemon. With Gorgon, the second verse is the same as the first, with almost the same team as before, just fully evolved. Essentially the same Shadow Pokemon combination as Snettle 2, just a bit weaker in execution. The blue bodyguard from before, Ardos, challenges us at the top of the volcano. His team consists of 6 powerhouses and is the first trainer to use 3 Shadow Pokemon against you. Depending on your team, this has the potential to snowball very quickly if you aren't careful. Even if you aren't aiming to snag everything, this is easily the toughest fight yet. Snorlax's Shadow End, powered up in Shadow Sky, is a deadly force. The red bodyguard, Eldis, carries 4 Shadow Pokemon. For a team of regular Pokemon, this will be a formidable challenge, with moves like Marowak's Shadow End being incredibly brutal, but the cracks start to show a bit here if you challenge him with Shadow Pokemon of your own. How those cracks start to show is best demonstrated with the fated encounter with XD001. With a full party of regular Pokemon, attempting to catch Lugia without a Master Ball is incredibly tough. Lugia has an unlimited number of turns to dwindle down your resources, hitting for super effective damage every turn, nullifying measures like Light Screen or Reflect, and being able to hit both physically and specially to break down all the defensive measures you can muster up. If approached this way, it's a truly intense encounter that lives up to the hype. But most players won't be approaching it this way, instead opting to use their Master Ball and reduce what was previously a series record 7 Pokemon boss fight back to a standard 6 Pokemon encounter. Whether you catch Lugia or just defeat it, Greevil will come at you next with a full party of 6 Shadow Pokemon: Tauros, Exeggutor, Rhydon, Articuno, Moltres, and Zapdos. A tried and true team of Gen 1 juggernauts, this encounter ranges from either the easiest fight in the game or the toughest. Regular Pokemon, getting battered by a constant barrage of super effective moves, will be torn to shreds here, especially if you opted to face Shadow Lugia in battle. Successfully snagging every Shadow Pokemon on his team with a team of regular Pokemon is a tough challenge. If you use a team of Shadow Pokemon, or even Shadow Lugia on its own, however, this becomes the easiest fight in the game. Since Shadow moves are not very effective against other Shadow Pokemon, and opposing trainers are unable to use regular moves with their Shadow Pokemon, many late game encounters become a lot easier with a Shadow Pokemon of your own to take hits. And since their own moves will also not be very effective, it becomes much easier to whittle down your opponent's health without knocking them out. A battle against only Shadow Pokemon certainly highlights the flaws in the Shadow Pokemon system, and Greavil is nowhere near as tough as the final battle in Colosseum as a result. If Greavil has anything, it's memorability. A fight against 7 Pokemon in a row is still nearly unheard of, and if you want to challenge yourself, the option is there. Combine that with excellent background music, and you've got a very memorable final boss fight. With his plans in ruin, Ardos tries to convince Greavil to blow up the island, taking everyone down with him, but is stopped by Eldis speaking from the heart, convincing his father to give himself up and shut down Cypher as the storm finally clears and our journey ends. Of course, there's still post-game to tackle. A lot of it is worth a look, but other parts really aren't. The Purify Chamber at its full potential is the only way to purify the otherwise unpurifiable Shadow Lugia. It's great that you're required to really engage with the game to successfully get the full reward most people played the game to obtain. If you've caught every Shadow Pokemon, Mirror B appears at the top of the lighthouse using a team of 5 Ludicolo and the final Shadow Dragonite. It's a good reward. Heal Bell Dragonite, as of this video, is still exclusive to Pokemon XD. Egon invites us to compete in Ore Coliseum, a battle facility like the Battle Tower, but with preset opponents. There are several rounds that end in rematches with major bosses, and it's one of the toughest challenges in all of Generation 3. If you're proud of your team prepared for the Battle Frontier, it's worth it to put them to the test here against 7 carefully crafted boss fights. It's pretty cruel, however, for the developers to pit you against Pokemon who start at level 60 and scale with your highest level when you're not even likely to have reached the 50s yet. Realgam Tower hosts 2 unique battle facilities: Battle Bingo and Battle Sims. Battle Bingo starts with a preset Pokemon and a 4x4 bingo board, with the aim being to clear every square. Battles are simplified here, with every Pokemon having only one move and fights generally being decided on the first turn. You can catch up to 3 Pokemon on the board to support you and expend entry points to flip tiles. Bingos net you more points to flip more tiles, with the goal being to flip every tile to clear the card. Beginner boards are simple enough, but advanced boards require some prior knowledge of the board and occasionally a bit of luck. For what is essentially a gambling facility, it makes sense. It also marks the first, and to my knowledge the only time where a Pokemon from a future generation is playable in an earlier game, even if it is just Bonsly. Battle CDs can be found throughout the game and give you access to battle sims. Essentially, these are puzzle battles. For example, in one scenario you're stuck in a match with the Salamence without any attacking moves and need to find a way to get the Houndoom in reserve on the field before the turn limit runs out. Your opponents can't take you out in time, and you can't switch out because of Wobbuffet's Shadow Tag. So how do you solve this one? Knock out your own Salamence with Ice Beam and you're good to go. There's a lot of interesting scenarios like this, each rewarding you with an item for completion. These items vary in usefulness, but the scenarios are satisfying to solve for their own sake. Mount Battle returns once again, being the same slog it was in Colosseum. A bit quicker since you're going through it in story mode and don't have to wait for 100 straight opening and ending fanfares to play out, nor do you have to deal with level scaling. Your reward this time around is a Johto starter of your choosing that knows one of the elemental Hyper Beams. It's the only way to get an unevolved Pokemon that knows one of these moves, but most players today won't find this a particularly compelling reward for going through the gauntlet. If you really hate yourself, climb it 3 times for all 3 starters. Finally, there's one last side quest revolving around Pokemon that have lost their voice. It's a ridiculous back and forth process taking you around all of Ore, back and forth between Dr. Kaminko's house and the rest of the region. netting you a lucky egg at the end. It's a great reward, but hardly worth the hassle, especially today. So what are my thoughts on Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness after this revisit? Thankfully, it holds up incredibly well. Much better than its predecessor for sure. It's remarkable how much the team at Genius Sonority was able to refine and improve over the course of a year. Ori feels so much more alive than ever before thanks to improved animations, more acknowledgement of the player's actions, frequent dialogue updates throughout the course of the game, and dozens of optional scenes that players won't encounter without thorough exploration and revisits to old locations. While it's certainly a gentler Ori than we're used to, the new additions and changes maintain what made the region great, with only a few stumbles like the removal of the Under. Every new dungeon is a huge step forward compared to Colosseum's battle hallways, and they all fit thematically as well. The story isn't much deeper than in Colosseum, but Cypher continues to be the most interesting villainous team to face off against thanks to their clever schemes and unique teams. And side characters go a long way to making the journey an entertaining one. That said, it often feels too similar to Colosseum due to all the reused areas and a similar plot structure, not to mention frequent backtracking and the animations once again being totally unskippable. At least battles have improved significantly since then. The new Shadow Pokemon mechanics are excellent, and being given so many tools makes the game much more enjoyable to play and replay. And although it's not quite on the level of an average main series title in that regard, the unique elements of XD help out a lot. Being doubles focused for the main campaign is still an interesting draw. And a few more subtle elements, such as being forced to play on set mode instead of allowing switch outs, and not having any gym-like indication of what an area boss will be like, also make things more interesting. It's friendly enough to accommodate newcomers. Every Pokemon game is someone's first Pokemon game after all, while still putting up a reasonable challenge for seasoned players even if it's significantly toned down from Colosseum. It feels as though Genius Sonority was building up to a grander third entry they couldn't do on the GameCube. The time frame works out, as the Wii was only a year away from launch, and comments from Ardos suggest a Cypher revival is inevitable. Game Freak, however, has shoved the Ori duology under the rug. It's never referred to by name in the games, and they rarely acknowledge its existence. While I don't believe Colosseum to have aged particularly well, it has its charms, and if you're looking for something fresh that plays like a mainline title, Pokemon XD is a perfect choice. If Pokemon Snap can get a sequel over a decade later, I can only hope we'll be able to revisit Ori in the modern day sometime soon. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, I would appreciate it if you could leave a like and/or comment down below. And if you want to see more of these long-form analysis videos, please consider checking out my other content and subscribing for more in the future. Until next time, I'm Forma, and those are my thoughts.